Samsara Valley is one of those idle RPGs where you quickly realize it's not just about collecting characters, it's about building the right team. With more than 70 unique heroes in the roster, every character brings something different to the table. Some hit hard with insane damage, some lock enemies down with debuffs, and others completely change the flow of a fight with support skills and buffs. And the tricky part? Picking the wrong combination can seriously slow your progress, especially once the game starts pushing harder content. So in this video, we're breaking it all down for you in a simple tier list format. We'll be ranking the top 30 heroes based on their damage output, support value, team synergy, and how well they scale into late game fights. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into Samsara Valley, this should help you figure out which characters are actually worth investing in, and which ones you might want to skip for now. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking resources in Samsara Valley. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
My friends, only 0.1% of viewers subscribe. If you like this type of content, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you in advance for your support.
The resources in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Diaochen, Ladybug, Yingning, and Xiao Xianen. Now things start getting a bit awkward in the roster because this is the point where early usefulness and late game reality start arguing with each other. Ladybug is a classic example of a support idea that sounds better on paper than it feels in practice. She increases the overall damage enemies take, which gives you a nice boost in the early stages when every little advantage matters. The problem is, her own damage is extremely low compared to every other assassin in Samsara Valley, so you are basically bringing her just for that debuff. And as the game goes on, that vulnerability effect starts losing value fast because enemies get tankier, mechanics get more complex, and Ladybug just stops keeping up. Then we have Yingning, who honestly feels like your comfort starter mage before the game shows you what real damage looks like. Her passive energy regeneration lets you use skills more often, which is great when your roster is still limited, but her scaling does not hold up at all, and she ends up falling behind quickly. The moment you unlock stronger options like Rushi from the B tier or Gongbao from the A tier, Yingning basically gets politely shown the exit and replaced without hesitation. Xiao Qian sits in a similar situation but from the warrior side. She brings some modest buffs and has a burn effect that sounds like it should matter more than it actually does. The issue is her base attack is too low, so even her damage roll feels underwhelming. And since warriors are expected to survive on the front line while also dealing consistent damage, Xiao Qian ends up doing neither job at a satisfying level once you move into mid and late game content. And finally, Diaochen, who tries to be the chip damage over time character with her poison effect at the end of each turn. The idea is simple, slowly wear enemies down. In reality, it barely scratches them. Her base attack is already lower than most mages, and the fact that her poison can only be applied once per battle really seals her fate. She ends up being one of the weakest damage dealers overall, with no real late game identity to fall back on. The resources in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Bone Spirit, Gongsun, Jianli, Rushi, Yingying, and Zhen Mi. Now we are entering that uncomfortable middle zone where characters are not bad enough to ignore, but not strong enough to build a long-term strategy around. Jianli tries to be that reliable frontliner who does a bit of everything. She counterattacks enemies, boosts both her own and allied damage output, and even applies weakness to significantly reduce the attacker's attack damage. On paper, that sounds like a solid hybrid warrior. In practice though, her damage contribution is just not high enough to justify keeping her in the lineup once stronger options appear. Warriors like Zhurong and Shihi simply outperform her in both offense and survivability, making Jianli feel like a stepping stone rather than a final choice. Bone Spirit is one of those characters that looks amazing in highlight moments but struggles in consistency. She focuses on bursting down the lowest health enemy and restores energy when she gets a kill, which can lead to very fast ability cycling. The issue is simple. If she does not secure kills, her entire kit slows down and falls apart. In longer or tougher fights where enemies survive longer, Bone Spirit ends up feeling unreliable and heavily situational. Zhen Mi brings healing into the picture, but with a risky twist. She can heal low HP allies during early and mid-game, and she even triggers an instant heal when her own health drops below 50%. That mechanic sounds clutch, but it forces her into a dangerous position just to activate her full value. Compared to top-tier healers like Xuanming and Sujin, she ends up feeling like a support who is constantly one mistake away from collapsing. Gongsun takes a more offensive support approach, hitting up to 3 enemies with scaling damage while converting part of that damage into healing for the lowest HP ally. The concept is flexible, but her self-attack buffs and damage reduction effects do not scale well into late-game content. As fights get longer and enemies get tougher, her overall contribution starts to fall behind dedicated rangers who simply output more consistent damage and utility. Yingying is all about control, binding enemies to completely restrict their actions while also dealing decent early game damage. The problem is that she peaks too early. Once you move into mid and late game, both her crowd control and damage get heavily outclassed by higher tier rangers, leaving her without a strong identity when it matters most. Rushi rounds out this tier as a mage who focuses on burn damage over time and applying weakness to reduce enemy output. She does provide some early utility, but her long-term impact drops off quickly. Her burn and weakness values simply cannot compete with stronger debuff and damage dealers like Xuanyuan and Gongbao, which makes her fade out of relevance by the time mid-game arrives. The resources in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Bifang, Gongbao, Mystic Lady, Shishi, Suzhen, Xianglan, Xiaowan, Xuanji, Yuanyuan, and Zhao Zhong. At this point in the roster, things finally start feeling like real team-building territory, where every character has a strong identity, but also a very clear weakness holding them back. Mystic Lady is one of those support units that can completely flip a fight in the right moment. She brings valuable crowd control nullification that can save your team when things get chaotic, and her silence effect can stop enemy ultimates before they even happen. That kind of utility is always useful, but her problem is consistency in overall impact. Outside of those clutch moments, her damage is low, and she does not scale into late game pressure the way meta rangers or top supports do. Suzhen leans fully into pure survivability. She provides strong healing to the lowest HP allies and adds agility buffs that increase crowd control resistance across the team, which makes her extremely stable in difficult game modes. The downside is obvious though, she brings no damage at all. So in fights where healing alone cannot solve the problem, Suzhen starts to feel like she is only delaying defeat instead of actively securing wins. Gongbao is a scaling damage dealer who slowly becomes stronger as he builds jealousy stacks throughout the fight. He also has a stun ability that can interrupt enemy skill usage at crucial moments, which adds nice control value. However, his biggest issue is dependency. Without a strong main DPS alongside him, Gongbao's damage feels incomplete, making him less flexible in compositions that need self-sufficient carries. Bifang sits in that strong mid-game, shaky late-game category. Her plume debuff delivers solid burst damage after each turn, and her wind breath buff increases her base attack for a noticeable power spike during mid-game progression. But once enemies get tankier and fights get longer, her effectiveness drops off, and she starts losing relevance compared to more stable late-game options. Yuanyuan is almost the opposite design philosophy. She becomes stronger the longer the fight goes thanks to her beauty stack mechanic, which boosts her damage and also lets her absorb more punishment from affected enemies. The catch is that she is extremely self-contained. She does not provide any team-wide buffs or utility, which locks her into a pure damage role and limits her usefulness in optimized team compositions. Xiaowan brings a mix of anti-heal and team support. She reduces enemy healing output, which is valuable against sustain-heavy enemies, and she can also grant random allies an encourage buff that increases critical rate for more damage pressure. Even with that utility, her own late-game damage is not strong enough to compete with dedicated rangers, which pushes her more into a secondary support role rather than a core damage dealer. Shishi tries to be a hybrid healer and buffer. She heals allies, grants a penetration buff that improves armor breaking, and even triggers extra damage buffs when her HP drops below 50%. That last condition is where things get risky. It forces her into dangerous health thresholds just to activate her strongest effect, which makes her less reliable compared to safer, more consistent healers like Xuanming. Zhaojun is a classic execution-style damage dealer. She can finish off low HP enemies with heavy burst damage and gains additional damage boosts whenever an ally uses an ultimate, which creates strong teamfight windows. However, her biggest flaw is survivability. She is very vulnerable to crowd control and can be taken out quickly if she is not protected by a proper cleanse or support setup. Xuanji is a high-risk scaling DPS who becomes more dangerous as fights progress. She deals increasing damage below 50% HP and gains corruption stacks that continuously amplify her output over time. The longer she survives, the scarier she gets. Unfortunately, her fragility is a major problem in late game content, where high burst damage enemies can eliminate her before she fully comes online. Xianglan rounds out the tier with a poison-focused damage kit that can even trigger through attack blocks, giving her an interesting layered mechanic. In practice though, her reliability is the issue. Because her poison application depends heavily on blocking enemy attacks, she struggles to consistently activate her full damage potential in late game fights, making her performance feel inconsistent compared to more stable damage dealers. The resources in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Changxi, Indra, Lua, Peacock Twin, Queen Mother, Shihe, Xuanming, Zhirong, Twin Queens, and Xuanyang. Now we reach the point where the roster stops feeling balanced and starts feeling slightly unfair, because S tier is basically where heroes begin solving problems instead of just contributing to them. Indra is the definition of a progression carry. She deletes enemies below a certain HP threshold with massive burst damage and then pushes that pressure even further with crit on hit scaling. On top of that, she randomly applies debuffs that weaken enemy efficiency across the board. In practice, she does not just finish fights, she accelerates them, which is exactly why she stays dominant from early stages all the way into late game content. Changxi plays more like a controlled pressure tank hybrid. She focuses her damage on the front line, which naturally melts high HP enemies over time, while also granting parry to the entire team for a noticeable survivability boost. Her Moonlit Bloom effect adds consistent end-of-turn burst damage, so even when she is not actively attacking, the fight is still tilting in your favor. Queen Mother is pure chaos in the best possible way. She can hit 3 random enemies with a single massive burst, and she layers that with binds and fragile debuffs that both restrict actions and increase all incoming damage. Then you add her end-of-turn burst on top, and she basically turns every fight into a slow collapse for the enemy team. Peacock Twin is one of those heroes who becomes more dangerous the worse the situation gets. When an ally falls, she retaliates with heavy damage, and her Zen Path effect increases all damage enemies take, making her scale naturally in longer fights. Add burn damage over time into the mix, and she slowly turns attrition battles into inevitable wins. Lua is easily one of the most flexible units in the entire game. She can execute low HP enemies, apply Zen Heart to increase damage taken when she drops below half HP, and also heal the 2 lowest HP allies during combat. That combination of finishing power, survivability, and utility makes her feel like a complete kit rather than a specialized role. Zhirong stands out as the most self-sufficient warrior in the roster. He can shield himself and allies, convert incoming damage into healing, and deal strong damage specifically to high attack damage enemies while also reducing their offensive power. He does not rely on teammates to function well, which is rare for frontliners in Samsara Valley. Xuanyang is a scaling execution machine. Her Divine Flame mechanic lets her mark enemies and finish them instantly once they drop below 50% HP. As fights go longer, she stacks more value and turns into a constant execution threat, making her one of the strongest endgame mage options available. Xuanming is simply the backbone of any serious team composition. She heals multiple allies at once, applies shields to absorb incoming damage, and removes crowd control effects in a single kit. No split focus, no gimmicks, just complete support utility, which is why she sits at the top of the support hierarchy. Twin Queens specialize in dismantling enemy backlines. They remove high-value targets quickly, apply Divine Flame for increased vulnerability, and shred enemy armor to amplify team damage. In late-game content where supports and ranged enemies decide fights, their ability to erase backline threats makes them extremely valuable. Shihe closes out the tier as one of the most balanced heroes overall. She pressures the front line with heavy damage, provides team-wide guard for damage reduction, and brings reliable crowd control through stun. Very few heroes manage to combine offense, defense, and control this smoothly, which is why she remains consistently strong in almost every situation. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.